Forward. God has always used ordinary human beings to do extraordinary things, such as Elijah raining fire from heaven. Samson, well, Samson was awesome, from beating an army with a donkey's jawbone to killing a lion with his bare hands, or using a little shepherd boy named King David to bring the Messiah into the world, just to name a few that you would most likely remember. But what about the hundreds that you may have never heard of, people like Smith Wigglesworth, John Bunyan, and A. Allen? These men also existed and had done some modern-day miracles, from healings to bringing the dead back to life. God used them as he did the biblical prophets. However, they may not have been as well known or had many books written about them, but they still lived. Their exploits may not have been recorded, but it doesn't change the fact that God used them to do modern miracles during the time of their ministries. What you are about to read is a work of fiction. It is a novel. I have been wanting to do this particular story my whole life. In these pages you will see how Satan is always behind the scenes, trying to tear down men and women of God, and how God used them to achieve impossible goals, sometimes with the help of supernatural beings we call angels. The setting is that of a time during the late 1800s, when life in America was still fairly new, and things were much simpler, yet life in general was harder. However, the supernatural world never changes. It doesn't rely on fashions of the day, or even political views. It remains unbiased and never changing. As you read this adventure of the Samson family, and witness them as they try to pull together to defeat evil, fighting the natural and the supernatural worlds, you will see how life, the death of loved ones, sickness, and just plain evil men can try and stop you from doing the work of the Lord. But, in the end, the Lord always wins. Prologue. One day in late June, as I was going through my great-grandfather's attic, I discovered an old folder wrapped in rubber bands and stuffed inside a compartment of an old World War II footlocker. The folder, well, it was entitled The Samson Boys, Sons of Thunder. I had no idea what that meant. My father or grandfather never spoke a lot about my great-grandfather much. Being a curious person as I am, I opened it, not truly knowing what to expect. I never knew from my great-grandfather. He died several years before I was conceived. I knew very little about his past, as I began to read his notes from letters, newspapers, articles, scribblings on pieces of old paper, and my journals. I began to see a story unfolding. It seems he was connected to these men called Jeremiah and Charles Samson, through an acquaintance of my great-grandfather's, whom, from what I could understand, was a traveling evangelist. I decided to put the story onto paper to be shared with the rest of the world, because some of this sounds so fantastic that I scarce believe it myself. My great-grandfather was a pastor in his later years. Those that knew him, even his closest friends, referred to him as Pastor Reed. He was my great-grandfather, and this is the story I came across so many years ago. Part 1. The Sons of Thunder. Chapter 1. A Dark and Stormy Night. Well, no one here has seen 'em. Looks like another dead end, but we could keep looking if you want, said the tall man as he stepped up to the table. His eyes were squinted, his toes pointed inward from years of riding a horse. He was soft-spoken, but spoke with authority. He had a long brown and gray mustache that stretched almost up his long, slender face to his ears. "We will move on and keep looking. This is where the trail ends in this place," said the man sitting at the little round table at the far corner of the restaurant. The room was dark. The sun had just started coming up over the mountain. As he set down his coffee mug hard on the table-top, spilling a little on the flowered cloth that covered it, as if it weighed 100 pounds, the cup made a loud, echoing thud. "He has got to be here somewhere. I can feel it," said the man as he rubbed his callous hands over his eyes and down his narrow face. You could see the weather on his face. the shadow where his beard had started to grow. The level of frustration was evident. He was always a clean-shaven man. His long mustache had always been well trimmed, but the stress, worry for life, and present events had started taking their toll on this once youthful, energetic man. His eyes were heavy from a lack of sleep. His clothes, that were usually well pressed and starched, were now dusty and wrinkled and worn. His voice crackled from the dust of the roads in which he and his companions had been traveling for several months now. The year is 1889. The man is a preacher and evangelist looking for a lost soul, but not just any lost soul. He has found many of them in his travels, but this one is special to him. One might even say dear to his heart. "We keep looking," the man said with squinted eyes as he put his old white-brimmed hat atop his head. "All right, I'll get the horse ready," said another man standing by the open doorway, as he turned to head out into the cool morning. "We can't give up now," as he looked up from the table at his old friend. "All right, let's go," said the older man as he handed his friend his coat. His name is Jeremiah Elijah Samson. He is one of 3 boys. One died very young. The other travels with him and their father. Elijah was born in Johnson City, Tennessee. His father, James Samson, was born in the mountains of Rowan Mountain, Tennessee, and he lived there until he met his wife. Not long after they moved into the city, and he took a job for making cabinets for an old man who, for health reasons, no longer desired to work. He was admittedly unhappy living the city life. He thought the streets were nasty, people were rude and selfish. He refused to wear the modern clothes of the time. He insisted on dressing as he had always known, in furs of the animals he himself killed. His wife bore his first child in the city, and 2 years later his second. They were not a wealthy family, but they survived. Work was plentiful, and new settlers were coming in every day, and a man who could manipulate wood as James Samson could was sought after, because new settlers always needed new furniture, cabinets, and the like. The old man wanted James to take over his business. He was considering the old man's proposal when, during the final week of his wife's pregnancy with his 3rd child, tragedy struck. The town remembers it well. The papers all reported it, and some have never forgotten the horror that took place that night in the year of 1881. It was late in the middle of the night when the rain came down hard on the old clapboard roof covering the Samson family's front porch, when a couple of strangers came by to pay an unwelcome visit on a misguided mission. "James, you hear someone knocking?" said Sarah, as she began cleaning off the remains of the night's dinner from the kitchen table. "Sound like rain to me. Charles, go upstairs and change for bed," James said to his middle child as he sat playing with a wooden train that his father had made him out of some scraps of wood. Charles Robert Samson was a child full of energy and was always into something, and rarely listened on his parents' first command, but this night he was calm and for once obeyed his father without an argument. "I'm sure someone's knocking," Sarah insisted. "Okay, woman, I'll go check," said James in his rough, uncouth manner as he rose from the table. You could hear his heavy boots as he thudded across the wooden floor. He paused as he reached for the handle of the door. "What's the matter, Jim?" was all that Sarah could get out of her mouth, when the door exploded wide open, and 2 men with guns drawn pushed open the door, knocking James back against the wall. In a split second James came to himself, his eyes slightly blurred by the force of the men entering the house. He could see the barrel of an Army .44 revolver staring at him in the eye. "What do you want here?" James asked, not showing any fear toward the large pistol being pointed at his face. "We're looking for Paul Walker," said the one holding the gun on James. He was a rough-looking guy, tall and skinny, one eye squinted from a fight he might not have won. "I don't know any Paul Walker," James screamed as he lunged for the gun and the man. The skinny man was fast. James was a born scrapper. He never took any maltreatment from anyone. He had no fear of dying or fighting. In the mountains, it wasn't uncommon for a dispute to be settled with fists. The emaciated man pulled back on the pistol so James couldn't get a hold of it. James had more muscle than his much thinner opponent as he pushed the scrawny guy against the wall. He first heard a gunshot and then a sharp pain at the base of his skull. The vision in his eyes went black as he felt himself fall at the feet of the evil intruder. James began to pull himself together, thinking he was dead at first. He reached behind his head to feel where the throbbing was located, at the base of his cranium. Feeling a damp spot, he knew that he was bleeding. He started making out images. His eyes were still very blurry. He made his way to one knee, resting on his right hand to force himself to his feet. His first sight was of one of the attackers lying on the floor, kicking and screaming, speaking a language that he could not recognize. The other aggressor was in the corner, crying out, screaming, in fact. It was all confusing to James, who was still trying to wrap his mind around what was happening in his own dwelling. There was another man that wasn't there before. He didn't recognize him. James clung to the wall as he forced himself to his feet. This new guy was on top of the skinny intruder, screaming something. James' head was throbbing so loud he could barely make out sounds at all. What caught his eye, and the thing that sent his body cold, was his wife. She was lying almost in a sitting position against the doorway to the kitchen. The table was knocked backward as if she was pushed violently against it. As he focused his eyes, he could see red all around the wall where she sat. He scrambled to get to his feet. The dizziness hit him all at once. His head throbbed again, reminding him he was still in pain. Just then he realized what had happened. The guy crying out on the floor behind him must have hit him from behind. The blood he had at the base of his skull was a testament to that fact. He made his way past the stranger that was still holding down the skinny man, and this time James caught some of the words the stranger was shouting. The only words he really heard or could understand was, "In the name of Jesus." What he couldn't see, what he could not possibly hear, was the dark figures surrounding the room, the evil that was present, the evil that was behind it all, the evil that was conspiring as the horror unfolded before him. "It's done, my master," the less significant demon said to his dark master. He stood tall as a victorious general. He was clothed in dark robes with a tint of purple outlining his tall frame. His long, dark black hair lay down his back. "I do not see how Father can turn this around to his victory. We have them," the evil leader said as he peered at the scene through his red eyes. "What about him?" said another evil spirit, pointing to the new arrival that was on top of one of the assailants. "He is of no consequence to us," the devil remarked as he turned from the scene on which he had created. "Let's leave before Michael shows up again," the lead demon said as he vanished from the little house. He made it to his wife's body.